So with that, I will call this meeting to order. Are there any changes to the agenda?
No, there are not.
Comments by the public not on items related on the agenda. I know I've got one speaker slip from Mr. Phil Walker. Come on up, Mr. Walker.
I probably wouldn't even have been here today, but a neighbor a couple blocks down on Quinientos, he owns a sizable landscape maintenance company, asked me to come in and speak for him. He has recently lost 2 contracts, again, out in Montecito where he does a lot of his work. But, you know, I brought this up before City Council ways back, and it's impacting the employment base, the drought. And it's something to be taking more into consideration as things ratchet up. You know, if we go to stage 3, stage 4, stage 5, you know, it does affect employment, and people are starting to feel it and hurt. So thank you very much.
Gonna have to get this microphone thing down. Okay, meeting minutes. Any comments on the meeting minutes?
Move approval. Second.
We've got a move and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next is the drought update. Ms. Taylor?
Thank you very much, Chair Burney and Commissioners. I'm here this afternoon, and I will be presenting the Stage 2 drought update with Kelly Dyer. And this presentation was presented to the City Council this month.
Chair Burney, Commissioners, I'm Kelly Dyer, Water Resources Supervisor, and the outline of today's presentation is to walk through the water supply outlook, discuss supplemental water, and as well as drought response capital projects. So many people that have been following our discussions the last 8 months or so are very familiar with this chart, but I thought I'd take a moment just to remind those who maybe haven't seen it before what it is. And so this is our current supply strategy that we do based on our long-term water supply plan. We plan for a 6-year dry weather period, and we are currently in year 3. And these projections, because we've had the 3 driest consecutive years in recorded history, we've actually adapted our plan in response to the extreme dry conditions. And so this projection assumes there are no reservoir inflows and no state water going forward, which is consistent with what we've experiencing. And so the purple bar at the bottom is our recycled water. The dark blue bar is our Kachuma entitlement. Medium blue is carryover storage at Kachuma. Light blue is Gibraltar supplies. The green bar is our state water. And yellow is groundwater. Orange is supplemental water purchases, and green is desal. The red bar is the amount of conservation that reflects our goals for extraordinary conservation. This is conservation beyond our normal conservation program, where we really need people to go above and beyond during periods of drought. So we're currently in year 3, and our supplies have been tracking as planned. And looking ahead to year 4, we are planning to use more supplemental water purchases and groundwater, and less supplies from Kachuma and Gibraltar. This shows basically the supply component, zooming in just for year 3, which is our current water year. The water year goes from October 1st through September 30th. So we're just approaching the end of year 3, and the very far left bar represents our plans for the whole year. The middle bar represents what we had planned for year to date through June, and then the bar all the way to the right is our actuals. And so we are tracking as planned. We've used a little bit more state water, the green bar, than originally planned, but generally we're on track in terms of the totals, which is good. This is a chart of our monthly demands. We've been watching these every month. And the green dashed bar green dashed line is what we would plan based on the average seasonality of demands. And the blue dashed line is our target for the 20% demand reduction. And so you can see in the months of June and July, we've really seen a great response from our community in meeting the targets for the 20% savings. This looks at it in a different way. So,
I'm sorry. One moment. Mr. Russell? Or Mr. Ruiz?
Yeah, could you go back?
Sure.
I just want to make sure that I understand this presentation because I've watched it a couple of times now. And I guess I'll start by saying, why is water year 2014 planned and water year 2013 different?
Water year 2014 planned is based on an average of the last 5 years, while the water year 2013, there's slight variations from month to month, but and that's because of weather and rainfall. So every year there's always fluctuations from month to month. At the end of the year, for water year 13, we ended about 3% higher overall than what we would normally have planned.
Okay. And then just so we have a common understanding of 2014 actual, it's my understanding that that is total potable metered water sales, including the 3 irrigation classes. Is that correct?
It's actually total production overall system-wide. So it's not based on metered sales, but rather the amount of supply produced. And this is looking at a combination, it's total demands for our potable and recycled water system.
Okay, well, the reason I've started looking at this is I saw this presentation at City Council, and then I wanted to try and compare it to this document for the rest of the Water Commission. This is the document we get every month under the Water Resources Manager's Report. It's usually the first page. It's called Planned and Actual Water Production by Source. And I'm just not seeing a direct correlation between this 18% savings in July and the information on this document. This document is showing very little.
So let me grab the report. So in June, our water system total planned demand was about 1,400 acre feet. It says 1,390 on our table.
Right.
So looking at the chart, that would be the green line, which is about 1,400 in June. And then in June, we actually saw 1,200 acre feet of demand. So that's the red line up on the chart.
And so it's 1,270, that's 18% below 1,552 for July.
Which column are you seeing, 1,270?
July actual,
July actual.
1,270, and the plan was 1,552.
Right. Mine says 1236, but that may be because I'm looking at a preliminary version.
All right. I didn't know you were using production numbers. And I mean, I think just from my perspective and what I wanted to share with the rest of the commission is looking at this in total year to date, you know, we've only seen a less than 3% reduction in actual versus the plan, which is kind of disappointing. And but that's fine.
We expected, you know, we did see very high demands in January. We were very concerned about that, which is why we declared the stage 1, was to try and reverse the trend of demands going up because of the dry, hot weather. Typically we expect to see higher demands in dry periods. And so the stage 1 was declared in February, and stage 2 was declared in May. And our goals that we're using for our supply projections assume that the community meets the 20% target starting in June. So we made those adjustments because we weren't seeing the savings in the early months based on the voluntary reductions.
Am I on? Regarding the difference between metered sales and water production, we've seen a lot of times in the past that there are discrepancies between these numbers, and there are uses of waters that don't show up very well in the metered sales. So I think it's appropriate that we're using the production numbers, and even those gauges could be subject to some errors, of course.
This shows the total water saved, again, with our goals. You know, by June was when we really were counting on people to meet the 20% reduction. And so between June and September, which is the remainder of our water year, we're looking to see a total savings of 1,200 acre feet over that 4-month period. And so June and July have been a huge improvement compared with the previous months in terms of water conservation, and we're hoping that that continues and that we're able to make up the difference. If we can get another roughly 600 acre feet of savings in August and September, we'll be very close to meeting our goal of 1,200 acre feet. This chart is a breakdown of each of our customer classes and the different tiers of water use, just to explain where the water is typically being used. We have single-family residential on the far left is by far our largest demand compared with the other customers. It's primarily because we have the most accounts. We have about 19,000 accounts for single-family residential. And about half of our water is in tiers 2 and tier 3, which are the green and the red bars. And so we're really targeting the water usage in tier 2 and tier 3, which is considered more discretionary use in our messaging. Supplemental water, our goal was to get about 4,500 acre feet of supplemental water purchases, and we've been working with CCWA for several months and have secured water from Vandenberg Air Force Base, about 1,150 acre feet. That is water stored in San Luis Reservoir. We also have contracts with Biggs West, Gridley, and Mojave Water Agency for another 1,800 acre feet. And in addition, we have banked water at Dudley Ridge. That's water that the city's state water that was put into storage in the groundwater basin. And we would look to try and get that water back next year if needed. And right now, the state water pipeline is running at full capacity to deliver all this water. So it's the pipeline going from San Luis Reservoir into Cachuma Reservoir. and it will be flowing at full capacity all the way to January to deliver this water. And so we're holding off on additional purchases at this time and going to see what next winter looks like before purchasing additional water. But there is room in the pipeline next year if we have another year with 5% state water allocation and need to fill the gap. So our infrastructure.
1 moment, Ms. Dyer.
I just wanted to ask, the fish release issues and the downstream releases, they don't interfere with our ability to take state water right now?
Not right now, because CCWA has implemented a temporary fix. There was an issue a few months back, if you recall. The Hilton Creek watering system failed, and the Bureau had to use the outlet works to do fish releases, which did limit our ability to deliver state water into Kachuma. So CCWA installed a temporary pipeline. It's an above-ground pipeline that bypasses the outlet works and brings the water into a different location in the lake, which resolves the issue of imprinting, which is a concern per the biological opinion. So for right now, it's a temporary fix, but we should not have any limitations due to the biological opinion to receive the water.
Is that something they're thinking about leaving there? Because that seems like a good idea.
I think we'll have to look at a long-term fix and see how much that costs.
Thank you.
So the city's capacity in the pipeline from San Luis to Kachuma is about 3,000 acre feet. This is about 20% of our total annual demand. So it's not enough to meet all of our demands. It's just a portion. And without the state water system, to convey the supplemental water, which we purchased this year, we would be looking at a 40% shortfall next year. Lake Kachuma is about 33% of capacity. It's important to note that not all of that is water for the Kachuma member units. Some of it is downstream water rights. And so the remaining deliverable project water, which is for the South Coast member units, as well as Santa Ynez River Water Conservation District ID1, the remaining deliverable water is expected to be 21,500 by October. All of the member units have agreed to take a 50% or 55% reduction in our entitlement for next water year, which begins October. And the hope is to have some supply remaining into 2016. And we've been in discussions with the Bureau of Reclamation regarding fish release requirements. Our biological opinion states that once project water reaches 30,000 acre feet, that fish releases can be reduced. It doesn't go into specifics on how exactly that would happen. It does. The Bureau will have to consult with National Marine Fisheries Service, and I'm sure there are going to be concerns with the timing and the months, and there may be some seasonality that they want to factor in. So they are currently in discussions on how that might look. Water rights releases of this is the downstream water rights for that's non-project water. They are planning to release 6,000 acre feet in August. So you will see a lot of water being released from the dam, and that is not our water, that is non-project water.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair and Chairman, the drought response capital projects, we have the recycled water system projects. I'll be telling you about our update for our groundwater projects, our desalination plant, and the comb pumping project. So first, the recycled water system projects. As you know, we have the tertiary treatment plant, and currently it is in construction, and it's anticipated to be online by summer of 2015 with a capacity of 1,400 acre-feet per year. We also have a Val Verde well project. We anticipate that we will be getting 300 acre-feet per year from this, and it's anticipated to be online at the end of this October. And this is going to be a non-potable groundwater source that we will be pumping into our recycled water system. Last month, I mentioned...
Ms. Taylor?
Yes.
Excuse me.
I know that we have a performance term in the recycled project construction contract. Do you happen to know what that date is?
Actually, there's a presentation later on about the recycled... No, there is not. I'm sorry. I do not know that date, but the engineer, Lisa?
Yes. That's fine. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So the next slide is, the last time I showed you a paper copy of the tertiary treatment plant, their construction webcam. This is a shot that was taken today to update you, to show you where we are. So they've set the forms, and they've poured the concrete for the groundwork. So hopefully the next month we will see us coming up out of the ground. Then our groundwater projects, our highlights are our Alameda well replacement. If we recall, the Alameda well in Alameda Park has failed, and we're trying to drill a new well. We do have a site that we've located. We've all decided that will work for everyone. We will be going to the Parks and Rec Commission on August 27th of this year to present the project to that commission, and we're also scheduled to be online with this project this summer of 2015. Our high school well, our consultant is conducting water quality testing to see if it's going to be of a quality that we can put directly into the distribution system, or it is something that we're going to have to pipe down to or take a groundwater treatment plant for treatment there. And then our Veracruz well, we had an electrical failure, and we've issued an emergency purchase order to make the repairs. The repairs, I was recently told, will not happen by the end of this month, but hopefully shortly thereafter. Also, the City Hall well, we had a pump failure, and an emergency purchase order has been issued to make these repairs. And again, the contractor should be on site, and we hope to have the repairs done shortly next month, but it will not be by the end of this month. Our upcoming desal project milestones, we plan to have a desalinization project update to council on September 23rd. We'll have a lot of information on that date, but I just wanted to mention what our upcoming milestones are. This first is the September 23rd, and that's going to be we'll present a summary of all the preliminary design findings with recommendations and project estimates. In November of 2014, we'll release it. Actually, it'll be an RFQ for design, builds, operate services. In February 2015, we hope to receive proposals for these services. And in April of next year, we'll be to council to consider an award depending on the water supply status. By then, we will pretty well know where we stand after the winter rains, whether we need desal or not. In summer of 2016, we're projected to start the desalinization operations. The supply strategy for the desal timeline, this is a similar chart to what Ms. Dyer showed with each year and the different water supplies from our water portfolio. And so in year 3, which is 2014, we've begun the pre-design. And in year 4, which is 2015, consider award of the design, build, operate contract. Within year 5, 2016, the desalinization facility would be online. And it would be online in time for the year 6, which is 2017, which will, if we do not have inflows into our reservoirs and no state water, that'll be critical need for water.
Is this contingent on some sort of permitting that we don't have in hand?
This is, of course, contingent on permitting at this point. I'm not sure the status of that right now. We'll know more at the meeting on September 23rd, where we stand with that. But of course, we'd have to have permitting in hand, yes.
At the city council meeting, you mean?
Yes.
So do you be getting information from the Coastal Commission or the state board or something?
That's anticipated, that there's a lot of activities going on right now, between now and then, yes.
Thanks.
September 23rd, so you've scheduled that as your city council report.
Yes.
Are you going to be able to give us a September update?
I'm not sure. I don't want to promise that because there's a lot of things happening very quickly, and I would imagine there'll be an update. I doubt that it'll be exactly the same update that will be given to council, because again, a lot of information is coming in, and the consultants and staff are working really hard on this is a very quick timeline.
Thank you.
The Combe Pumping Project. This project is still scheduled to be online by the end of September of this year. The total cost for the capital and operation through March of 2015 is about $6.1 million. And the city's shared cost is $2.2 million. And as for grant funding, the city received preliminary approval for a $500,000 California Department of Public Health grant. And we have to follow up with City Council with a resolution that's forthcoming. And the IRWIM grant, it's a regional grant application, has been submitted for approximately $2 million for this project.
Ms. Taylor, and that IRWIM grant, would that just go to the project overall, not specifically to the city's portion?
Well, it would be my understanding would be the city's portion towards that project.
Okay, thank you.
And we're hoping that we'll see this soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Ms. Dyer, I have a question. The graph you showed about the different users by tier, I was hoping at some point to see that with current conservation measures, and I know there was some uncertainty of whether or not we would actually have those numbers by now, but I was just wondering if we had any indication at all of where conservation was being successful.
We have seen some preliminary charts from June that are similar to this format, and we were seeing a reduction in the tier 2 and tier 3 usage for single family. It was noticeable, so that was good. I think we're seeing it across the board though, so I think everybody is cutting back in all of the customer classes.
When those numbers are not as preliminary, it'd be great to see that. Thank you. Okay. With that, we can move on to item 6. Before we do that, I just wanted to mention to those who just arrived, if you'd like to speak on the water conservation outreach. Actually, I'm sorry. Before we move on, I've got a request for a speaker, Mr. Phil Walker.
Good afternoon again, Madam Chairwoman and members of the Commission. About 2:30 in the morning 3 weeks ago, I got off work, got home. It almost blew right by me, but they had a noted NASA meteorologist on the radio. This was on PRI. And he said that everything is setting up just like last year, with the polar vortex driving deep down into the heartland, even to the Gulf of Mexico coast, and the Omega High or blocking ridge over the west coast. And then you put that together with what Mr. Bill Patzert, JPL, another noted meteorologist that's had a very good record. He says, count on dry, 75%, if he were a betting man. So good chance you might be pulling the trigger on that desal plant, which I brought up before City Council during Mayor Bloom's tenure. And my concern at that point was seismic survivability. Sometimes disasters tend to roll together into one another, so something to think about. Thank you.
Thank Thank you, Mr. Walker. If you would like to speak on the next item on the agenda, which is the water conservation outreach, we do request that you fill out a speaker slip and hand it to Ms. Taylor at the front here. And with that, we'll move on. Ms. Ward, the floor is yours.
Chair Burney and Commissioners, my name is Madeline Ward. I'm the Acting Water Conservation Coordinator, and today I am going to talk all about conservation, what we can do inside and outside and also at businesses to conserve water. So we'll briefly touch on the water use regulations that we have here within the city. We'll talk about indoor conservation, that's basically behaviors, the commercial rebate program for large businesses. Outdoor conservation is a really big focus of ours, and that's where most of our city programs are as well. So the Stage 2 regulations, these were in effect starting May 20th of this year, and we've tried to do as much education as we can, but a lot of that is on a case-by-case basis as we see this occurring. But washing of pavement and other hard surfaces is generally prohibited. Irrigation, we're really trying to limit the amount of water that's lost due to evaporation. Therefore, for automatic sprinklers and even for manual watering, we try to encourage that takes place in the evening and early morning hours when the evaporation rate is much lower. Pools must be equipped with a cover to reduce the amount of evaporation there. Large commercial fountains are prohibited. Water can only be served on request in our restaurants, and drought notices must also be placed in those restaurants, as well as hotels and gyms. And we do have a handout on the table in the hallway. We have all kinds of information and handouts in that hallway that I'll be referring to, but we have one that's English and Spanish about these regulations. This is a picture of the water use in the average home. As you can see, the sort of salmon colored is that's landscaping, exterior water use. So that's a pretty large majority of the water that we use, and this is pretty typical for all of California. Inside, there's definitely a mixture, but we do see that light purple leaks in there. And what we're really trying to target for conservation, and especially during the drought, is to reduce leaks and also landscaping water use. All right, so let's talk about some indoor conservation opportunities. Once again, a lot of this is behavior because the plumbing code is much more stringent, especially starting this year in 2014. It's pretty impossible to go out and buy a toilet or a shower head that wastes water. They're very efficient, and that's all you can find in the stores. So it's really behavior, such as when you're hand washing, instead of letting the water run, use a basin in the tub, soaking pots and pans, or if you have a dishwasher, make sure you scrape the food off. Don't use the water to do that, as well as no running water for defrosting food. Running full loads in dishwashers and washing machines, they've come a long way too as well, these appliances, but as long as you're using one of the older versions, just try to wash the largest load possible. And of course, turning off the water when you brush your teeth, shave, wash your hair, etc. This is something we tell the kids to do in class, and they generally tell us that they do it, but their parents don't. So we always try to encourage that everyone turns off the water when they do these activities. Showering, keep them to about 5 minutes or less. Try to shave off time as you can. Or we also ask you to join the bucket brigade and fill your bucket with cold shower water as you're waiting to heat it up. We do have some buckets out in the hallway. Or you can also, if you have a large enough bin, stand in a bin and collect all that water. There's many ways I've heard of people taking on this challenge and collecting that water and using it for their plants. Checking for leaks, that's always a really important one. I talk about that throughout this whole presentation. Also, we do have a rebate for high-efficiency washing machines because it is possible to still go out and buy one that's not too efficient. So we still have a rebate on that. And then also just this really simple aerator on bathroom faucets that you can see right here. Most of us have them on our faucets, but they have really efficient ones, and we also have those out in the hallway. They're best for bathroom faucets because you aren't filling large tubs or pots with water, so you really need it for minimal amounts of water and not really high volume. So we have 1 gallon per minute aerators out there in the hallway. All right, so the biggest problem inside is actually the toilet. And toilets are very sneaky, and they leak and they run when we aren't paying attention. So I encourage everyone to look for 3 things in their toilet. We have dye tablets out there in the hallway, and all you do is you place it in the tank, you wait about 10 minutes, and then you check the bowl to see if it's blue. It's just a little food coloring tablet. And if it's blue, that means that this flapper, which is the rubber red piece right here, that means it's leaking. So the water's going from the tank into the bowl and then down into the sewer. So you never hear it and you never see it because it's not pooling up on the floor. Obviously, it's going down to the sewer. That's about 200 gallons per day when that leaks. So sometimes when people call us because their water bill doubled, it's pretty regularly the toilet. And you never know when these flappers are going to start failing. Also, when you're in the back of the tank, dropping the tab in, take a look at this overflow tube and make sure that the water level in the tank is about 1 inch below the top of that tube. Because here in Santa Barbara, when we're all sleeping, the water pressure rises and it'll rise in the back of the tank and it'll start pouring over the overflow tube, and you're asleep so you can't hear it, you can't see it, and that's again about 200 gallons per day for that overflow tube. So that's a good one to take a look for. If your flapper's leaking, that means you need a new flapper. You need to make sure it's the right one for your toilet, for the manufacturer and the model. And then for the overflow tube, there's different ways to just adjust the water level. Each toilet's different, but there's a lot of YouTube videos telling you exactly how to do it for your toilet. The last thing, and this is another flapper issue, so this is the flapper right here, is if you have the wrong flapper, it could be leaking constantly with the dye tablet, or it could also be flushing at a much higher volume than the toilet's designed. Most of our toilets are about 1.6 gallons, but as we've been going around and testing some of them, they're flushing at 3 gallons or even more just because it's the wrong flapper. So take a look at your toilet, watch the tank when you flush, and when the water goes down, it really shouldn't empty the entire tank. It should leave a couple inches in the bottom, and the flapper should close pretty quickly after about 4 seconds. If it stays up and it's running, that's how you know it's flushing at a much higher volume. So again, you just need to buy the exact flapper for your toilet. And these are not very expensive. They're tiny pieces of rubber, but they can really cost you a lot on your water bill if it's not flushing correctly.
Does the city provide inspection of this type of thing?
Yes, we do. We for our water checkups, which is an indoor and outdoor visit to your site from a specialist, we do the dye tablet test. We take a look at the level in the back of the tank, and we usually tell them to check for this because if you flush the toilet right away with the dye tablet, the test won't work. So we educate them about the flapper issue. This one's less common. It's more common for the overflow or the dye tablet, but it's just something to every once in a while watch your toilet as it actually flushes to make sure it's not draining the whole tank.
And is this service provided only if someone notices that their water usage seems to be higher than makes sense and requests it?
You have to request the water checkup, but we don't have an eligibility for it. So if you just wanted a water checkup, you could get one. If you think your toilet might be having issues, you can. We have this information on our website, too. If people feel like they have a leak, these are the really common things we tell them to look for.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Water softeners can also be a hidden waste of water, especially if there's some of the older kinds that will backwash on a schedule. So what we recommend is our hardness setting in the city is about 20 to 25 grains per gallon. And you can try setting it at 20, see how it goes. Sometimes it takes about 2 weeks for these softeners to changeover and backwash. If you think it's not soft enough, then you can try setting it higher and higher. But we've had a lot of people just simply setting their water softener lower. They don't notice a change in the water, and they're seeing results on their water bill. So this is something that each softener is very different. It's really good to talk to your water softener company about how you can adjust this and make sure that it's using a correct amount of water and it's not cycling through too quickly. For businesses, we have a great program. We've had it for about a year now for our our high water use commercial, institutional, and industrial customers, where we go through and do a full site visit of all of the fixtures in every way that they use water. So we'll measure the flow rates of the toilets. This is when we really realized what an issue those flappers were if they weren't the right kind, is we would go to a site where the entire array of toilets were all flushing at too high of a volume. So this is when it really was brought to our attention. We'll help identify leaks and efficiency upgrades, and then we present what they can do and the projects that we recommend based on the return on investment. And right now we're going through the City College campuses. They're going through and changing out a lot of the fixtures, and also the schools, Santa Barbara Unified School District. All right, so now we're going to focus on outdoor conservation. About half of the water used in the city is for landscape watering, and of course we have beautiful landscapes here, but we want to make sure that they're using the right amount of water. Just for a comparison, the average 5-minute shower uses about 10 gallons total, and the average 15-minute lawn watering uses about 700 gallons. So this is the absolute most important thing that we can encourage people to do, is pay attention to their sprinkler and drip systems, because they come on at night, hopefully, if you're following the regulations. So it's sort of that, it's 4 a.m., do you know what your sprinklers are doing syndrome, where people aren't paying attention to if they're watering correctly, if they're running down the street, if they're broken, etc. So we really encourage people to check their sprinklers, take a look at what they're doing, or if you have a gardener that does this, make sure it's included in their contract to do this every time they're there, whether they're there monthly or weekly, to check this irrigation system. And we can help you do that. The city has a free water checkup, which is what we just talked about. It can be indoor and outdoor, or you can just have an outdoor evaluation, especially if you have a large site. It might just make sense to focus on the outside. But we'll take a look at the irrigation controller and the nozzles and the drip system and see how it's scheduled and if there's any red flags that we can see. So this can be scheduled at any time by calling the hotline number, which will be at the end of the slide, but it's 564-5460, and we'll come out to the site. The other thing that we try to push is watering plants for as much water as they actually need, so not overwatering them. And the best way to do that is to use your sprinkler timer and adjust it with the weather. And we do that with our watering percent adjust, which is on the city's website every week. And it's really tricky because we're not all horticulturalists, but plants really only need as much water as is provided by the moisture, or it's not evaporated. It depends on the plant type. So we try to boil all this down, all this complicated information, into just one number that people can use. And this is something that you just plug into your sprinkler timer. Almost every single sprinkler timer, even the old ones, have a section called water budget or water adjust, or it's just a percentage symbol. And what you do is you take our number, which right here is 79 for last week, and you plug it into your sprinkler timer, and that will reduce the run times for every station that you have on your program. So it's really just a one-button adjust, so you don't have to go through and change down all the minutes of every zone. And we also have it on Twitter every week, so you can just get it tweeted to you if you don't want to look it up on the website. And this will reduce the amount of overwatering. If your plants are only getting as much as they need, you can cut out about 20 to 30% of the water that you apply to the landscape, and your plants will be healthier. We also have a rebate program. This rebate program has been going on for 5 years now. It's 50% of the cost of materials, which can include all kinds of irrigation equipment, water-wise plants and mulch, smart irrigation controllers, gray water material, permeable surfaces, and now pool covers. It's up to $1,000 for single-family homes and up to $2,000 per meter for commercial, multifamily, and HOAs. And the most important thing with this rebate program is that we come out and do a pre-inspection before any work is done. And some people have lawns right now and they're letting them go, which is fine. We encourage that. Just take pictures now, get a pre-inspection, and we aren't enforcing the 4-month time limit. We're giving everyone an extension to replant when they're ready, and they can just contact us.
Can you just expand upon that a little bit more, why you're not sticking to that 4-month timeline?
Sure, of course. Especially since we're in the middle of summer, we don't want to encourage everyone to replace their lawns that are dead and then put in new plants and start watering them. So in the fall, the plant requirements for water are much lower. They put down roots instead of shoots, and so they don't require as much, and hopefully we'll get a little bit of rain to help establish those plants. So we're encouraging folks to wait until the fall to replant so that they don't need to use as much of our potable water, or until the drought lifts so that there's not that demand. Because even if you're putting in water-wise plants, they'll still need water to get established. Here's a quick before and after of a home that had a front lawn that they weren't using. So they decided to go through the rebate program, put in some nice water-wise and native plants and a drip system, and add a lot more color to their front yard. And they repainted their house. That's also really common. People get the rebate and then they realize they want to repaint their house at the same time. Smart irrigation controllers, these are part of the rebate program. It basically takes that whole watering percent adjust I was talking about and does it for you. Just like cell phone technology, sprinkler timers have really come a long way because it's a computer on your wall, and it knows what kinds of plants you have, and it knows the weather at your specific home, and it gets all its data and plugs it in, and it reduces the amount of water that the plants need. So this is something we also recommend, and we help offer workshops on them too, because they're a little complicated at first, but then they're very easy. Also, rotating sprinkler nozzles. These are part of the rebate program, but we also are giving them out for free now at freesprinklernozzles.com, and there's a postcard for this in the hallway. And these, as you can see in the picture, they send out little fingers of water, so there's much less evaporation. Instead of it just blowing into the air and being swept off by the wind, it distributes it as really exact droplets, and they reduce the water use by about 20% just by being really efficient in the nozzle itself. These are also very easy to install. You just unscrew the old one and put the new one back in. They're very helpful. Gray water is a growing topic here in Santa Barbara, and it has been here for many, many years. One of the easiest systems to install is called the laundry to landscape system, and they do not require a permit, which makes it even better. And really, it just uses the pump from the washing machine to push the water outside. And the water must be released under mulch in what we call a mulch basin. So the best things to water it with the gray water is probably a fruit tree or some sort of woody species, like a row of fruit trees or a hedge perhaps, because this isn't something that you can put in sprinklers and spray into the air. It needs to be released under mulch. This is part of the Smart Landscape Rebate Program for the materials cost of it, and we also have a lot of workshops around town. We work with one of the nonprofits called the Sweetwater Collaborative on these hands-on workshops where they show people how to put these in themselves. And we also have a DVD on how to put them in yourself that's available at all of the libraries. Rain gardens are also a great idea. Sometimes we don't get enough rain to contain in barrels, but you can always contain it in your soil and just turn it into a sponge. These are 2 demonstration gardens right in downtown. the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors, and Spencer Adams Park. And they really just redirected the gutters into the front yard and created a dry creek bed with a lot of mulch basins underneath. So what you see on the surface is very nice with plants and rocks, but there's some deep pits dug down so that the water can percolate into the groundwater instead of running off and down the road into the storm drains. We also have a great TV show about sustainable landscaping called the GardenWise TV show. We have about 30-something episodes at this point. They're all online at waterwisesb.org or the city site, and they also replay on county TV and city TV pretty often. Right here you'll see our host. This is Meg West showing how to do a worm bin, and then this is also compost tea demonstration. We have a virtual garden tours website that is linked from our own website. So if people don't know where to start, they had a lawn, for example, and they don't know what else to put in their front yard. This has great WaterWise plants. It's a database. You can click on all the plants and get all kinds of information on what you want to put in your yard. We also have a Green Gardener program. This has been going on for about 14 years. And it trains gardeners, maintenance gardeners, on sustainable landscaping practices. It's held every spring and fall through Santa Barbara City College Continuing Education, and they're also holding it in Santa Maria. It's a 15-week class, and it's taught bilingually, and the materials fee is only $20 for the whole class. Leak detection, one of the best things to find a leak outside, and this also, of course, includes inside, is just to read your meter when it's not being used. If you see this black triangle spinning, that means that there is water flowing through the meter. So this is really the most basic way to find out if you have a leak anywhere on your property. Also, if you have one of these meters, you'll see this little disc rotating through, and that means you have a leak. So we have a flyer out in the hallway for this. Also, if you have a period of time where you're not going to be at home, perhaps if you go run errands or you go to work, write down the number, leave for a few hours, come back, hopefully no water had been used, read the number again. It's just like an odometer, and it ticks up. Also, we are looking for our community to help report any water waste or violations that they see. They can call the conservation hotline. The best thing is to send photos. So there's two different ways to do that. You can email them to wconservation@santabarbaraca.gov, or we have an online reporting forum that's getting more and more popular because these come straight to my inbox, and that is santabarbaraca.gov/reportwater. And here is our website and our phone number for more information.
Thank you, Ms. Ward. I'm going to go to public comment. Again, if anybody has not turned in a slip, please do so to Ms. Taylor. We will start with Dave Wesolowski. I'm going to butcher that. I'm sorry about that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Dave Wesolowski. I'm founder and president of Sprinkler King Incorporated. We're stationed out of Atascadero, California, your neighbor cities here. And I watch the KTY news in the mornings, and I see that Santa Barbara is not meeting their conservation goals. So I won a contract in 2009 with the city of Arroyo Grande, who has a similar situation wherein they have a lake supplying their city, and they got up to where they were using 99% of that water, and they were only allowed to use 80%. They brought in consultants, much like you guys did, to come up with ideas for people to save water and so on and so forth, reducing the city's use by 30%. I ended up being one of the consultants, and I'm watching the program that you guys have for rebates. I watch your salmon area where all your water's going, and I'm wondering what's wrong. The program that Arroyo Grande put together that we helped assemble is working. It's working great. Wherever they apply this program, they're getting the conservation numbers. And so I came down here today just to go, wow, what's going on? Can I make a suggestion or anything like that? Because it seems like a city this advanced should be on it and should be hitting those numbers every time. Okay, and that's all I had to say. Thanks.
Next, Brad Smith, please.
Hi, Madam Chairman and board members, I came to a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and I just want to give you a quick update. I'm with Sweetwater Collaborative. We have like 5 projects going right now. I'll just tell you what they are and talk about a couple of them just very briefly. Our 5 projects, we do hands-on workshops that Madeline talked about. We do educational presentations. We have the youth drought mobilization I mentioned. We were just getting ready to start with that. We've had 2 training sessions. Barbara and I moved, so we've been kind of off for now, but we're getting started again. So we're training youth to do landscape work that saves water, removing lawns we're starting with. One of our members is starting Agua Nuestra, which is reaching out to the Latino community, and I think Mr. Keller had some connection in the very beginning when they're just getting started. And the last thing is we've had 2 drought forums, the Drought Strategy Forum and the Drought Action Forum. Out of that, we're looking to build a collaborative stakeholder network. The working hypothesis being that by bringing together all the different stakeholders that have knowledge and information and influence, that we can make a bigger impact on our water adaptation to our water cycles. So thank you.
Are you working with schools at all? I know most of the schools now have gardens, and so I'm just wondering.
We haven't gotten that far. We would love to collaborate. We're at the stage with the collaborative network. It's a bringing together stage right now. So we've had these 2 forums that we've collaborated with the city and different groups, and so we would love to. And maybe Barbara can speak.
Yeah, I'll look at it. I'm on the school district Parent Advisory Committee. I'm also at my daughter's school, Monroe. They have a garden, and I know almost all of the grammar schools do now, but it's for the most part volunteer by teachers. And so I think it'd be interesting to get your perspective on water use efficiencies involved there. I'll see what, school starts soon, so I'll see what I can do.
Great. Is Monroe the one that Judy Sims put in, or is that a different one? Okay, anyway, a friend of ours.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we've got Barbara Wishengrad.
Got to lower this. So hi, nice to see you all again. I was here, I think, a couple months. I'm also with Sweetwater Collaborative. I wanted to quickly address the school issue. There is a, Sweetwater is a nonprofit, so we have to create funding in order to keep moving forward with our programs. And there is a grant opportunity that we're starting to work on, which is through the state, which is about getting water harvesting in the schools. It's specifically for schools, and so we're in the process of looking for partners and starting to write that, and I think that it's due in the fall. I just got a little brief, some information about it. I have to pursue that. So I just wanted to briefly, thank Madeline, the Water Conservation Department we've been partnering with, and they're helping us put on these, helping to partially subsidize our work doing these hands-on workshops where we are helping to not only teach the community but also put in sustainable systems like rainwater and graywater systems, and also places that can be demonstration sites in the in residences, because as you saw, most of the water really is being used in the landscape. If we can really target the landscape, we're seeing that there are some really beautiful examples like from Italy and Provence that are Mediterranean gardens that are just like breathtaking. And so one of the things that we're doing through our partnership through the City of Santa Barbara Parks and Rec Outreach and Neighborhood Services, we're doing these educational programs. And so one of them we're going to talk about beautiful, landscapes and, that people are like just dying to get. We're also talking about doing a program like I Love My Lawn, like people who are really resistant to letting go of their lawn, how we can honor and listen to their feelings and also give them ideas of things that could meet their needs instead of feeling, taking kind of a punitive approach. And we had a successful event on drought proofing our fruit trees over at the Westside Center on the 21st or something of July, and so we're continuing to move forward, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, I believe it's Anthony Costello.
Hello. Nice to meet you all. Mr. Keller, hello. Madam Chair. My name is Anthony Costello. I'm first time you've met me here, but I'm working with Sweetwater Collaborative as well. And just want to explore, or I want to introduce you to Agua Nuestra, which is something that Brad just mentioned. And Mr. Keller has previous experience just in being introduced to that. But Agua Nuestra, the purposes of Agua Nuestra is to explore what sort of gaps, what sort of loopholes of information are there among the Spanish-speaking community. And I've done some research with WaterWise Santa Barbara website, and I've seen that there is a lot provided through the resources that they have posted online. But there seems to be a tangible sort of gap that Agua Nuestra is looking to fill, and exploring that through dialogue and exploring that through interactive activities with children and with parents, families, and schools. So just want to introduce that to you. Agua Nuestra is really taking up some of the seeds that have been sowed by programs that have maybe been tucked away or just lost their luster. Programs like through the UC University of California extension programs, which was started with 4-H and Agua Pura and GreenNet. They're all programs that have already been placed and maybe have lost their luster, but we want to revive that and also really focus and tune in on more of the gray water installation and rainwater harvesting advancements that there are today, and really push that idea forward for our children to be able to see these technologies and see these hands-on skills taking place and being effective for our environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Our last speaker is Juan Ayala. Sorry, I think I butchered your name as well.
Greetings to all. One quick thing about toilets. Recently I had to repair the toilets at my home, and I noticed the issue of the drip, the drainage, and I talked about it with the plumber, and he said that there were some new generation toilets that are to come online, that years ago the city used to provide some rebates for replacement of equipment in homes, including drain, sewage pipe, but such things are no longer available. But I heard that there are some rebates, so as just an average person in the community, I'm not well informed about this. I wonder if other people are having the same issues. And toilets apparently are a major culprit in water loss. So perhaps more education needs to be done in that area. And speaking of education, I have been active for a very long time. From almost 40 years ago, we proposed an institute that would be intertribal, multicultural, interdisciplinary for the study of sustainability and the development of sustainable practices. However, it hasn't quite developed in the way we had hoped. There is not even an Indian Cultural Center in Santa Barbara. At the time we proposed this, the Presidio was being rebuilt. It wasn't rebuilt yet. And we objected to the rebuilding of Presidio because, Presidio means a prison, and it really is a military garrison. So we thought of that as a monument to the wrong kind of culture that needs to be preserved in Santa Barbara or anywhere in the world. And water is part of a system. It's a life support system that is part of all the other life support systems of nature, and all these are living activities of living entities. Life is water is life. Some people say it's only H2O, but so it gets into an area where people say, we're mixing religion or spirituality with, but we see it as developing ecological literacy
as being the foundation of resolving all these issues long term, because these issues are going to be around for a long time, and future generations are going to be left with the messes that are being left behind by older generations. Myself, I had to spend my life cleaning up messes. My life could have been spent enjoying a little more life, but I've spent my life dedicated to this work. And we've been looking to work with cities, the district, the Department of Education, lobbied by the Earth Day Educators Network, established a program called the Green Ribbon Award Program, which recognizes schools for their architecture, their management, their nutrition, and the curriculum that addresses sustainability, energy efficiency, water conservation, all of this. And it'd be wonderful if all the agencies in Santa Barbara were to encourage each other and collaborate to make possible for the district to adopt these programs district-wide, and hopefully at least some schools would be recognized under this badge of green ribbon, which was like the blue ribbon that recognizes academic excellence only. And also, a colleague of mine, a friend of mine, is the founder and president of EcoCity Builders. And the sustainability project in Santa Barbara did bring him a couple of years ago, I think, for a brief lecture. But EcoCity Builders is in the Bay Area, and every 2 years they organize an international symposium on EcoCity building. Last year it was in France, next year it was going to be in Dubai, and I've asked him if they could assist us in organizing a local version of the EcoCity building conferences, where every aspect of a community is analyzed and looked into how we can, how do we become an eco-city? How do we live as an eco-city within the resources of the area? And I looked at the issues of human relations. I think we have a lot to work in that area, because ecological issues are really boiled down to human relations. There are some things that are obviously not sustainable, such as war, for example. And we have to figure out how to eliminate war out of human culture. And many other issues that impact water use and everything else. We need to work towards achieving optimal health, individually and collectively.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time.
I have two things I'd like to say. First of all, the gentleman that has a experience in Arroyo Grande, as you can see, we have a pretty comprehensive program here in Santa Barbara. But if there's anything clear that Arroyo Grande is doing that we're not, that works better, we'd certainly appreciate hearing about it. Second of all, on my own water bill this month, I noted that they had switched out the water meters, and the graphic of the water use only showed the new meter. So there's 4 HCF on the old meter and 1 on the new meter, and the graphic only showed 1. So at least in my case, the graphic is misleading, and in terms of informing people of how much water they've been using, there seems to be an error in the plotting program or something.
Thank you for letting us know. We'll look into that.
Any other questions or comments from the Commission? I just want to take a moment and thank staff and thank you all for being here. Usually the Water Commission doesn't meet in August, but in the face of this extraordinary drought, we felt that it was very important, and specifically to talk about this issue. I know, as I'm sure a lot of you do, we all do our part, and we can all do a little bit more. And so we wanted to have this discussion so that maybe we could all learn something. I know I've learned today from Ms. Ward, and I've also learned from some of you that spoke. This meeting will also be online and available, so if you have anybody, as I do, who asks, what else can we do, or how do we do a little bit better, how do we get and actually surpass that 20% goal, because that's really where we need to be, definitely point them to the city website where they can watch this presentation from Ms. Ward at their leisure. And with that, thank you very much. And we will move on to item number 7, input on water rates to support reactivation of the city desalination plant. And Ms. Dyer, I believe it's back to you.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, my name is Kelly Dyer. I'm here to discuss drought water rates in preparation for continued dry conditions. And we will be looking for your input today on some of the policy decisions that will need to be made going forward. We're at the very preliminary beginning stages of the rate study, and so we're looking for some early input as we set up the model. So I'll walk through some background and the purpose of the rate study, go through the proposed schedule for the rate study, introduce some of the policy issues, and then walk through some information in pursuit of some input from you. So in response to extraordinary drought conditions, the Council declared a Stage 2 drought in May, which involved regulations on water use restrictions and also drought water rates, and required that the city reduce water use 20% overall. And drought rates went into effect on bills starting July 1. The drought rates accounted for the increased costs that we have due to alternative supplies in the capital projects in response to drought, and also targeted the 20% reduction. Those customers that are already conserving or using less water had less impact on their water bill, while the higher water users saw the greatest impact on their bills due to the drought water rates. This chart shows how the City of Santa Barbara's monthly water bill compares with our neighbors for a average water use, single-family residential water user for the City of Santa Barbara. So average water use for single-family in Santa Barbara is 12 units, or 1,200 cubic feet HCF, and for that level of use, the city has the lowest monthly water bill. We already talked about this slide earlier, so I won't go into the details, but the point of putting it in here is that we're currently in year 3, and we're looking ahead to years 5 and 6, where if we have continued extreme dry conditions with no reservoir inflows and no state water, we will want to be prepared for the decision to reactivate the desal plant. And so the purpose of our discussion today is to discuss the rate study and incorporating the cost of doing desal into our water rates. We have been authorized for a contract with Reftelis Financial Consultants. They are the consultants that helped build our previous analyses. We have an existing rate model that they developed and did a comprehensive rate study a few years ago, and have supported us with our drought water rates. And so we will be building on that previous work and incorporating the cost of reactivating the desal facility. The approach will be to pay the capital costs with the loan and pay the operating costs as we go, as we produce the water. And the goal will be to develop water rates for potential Stage 3 drought condition. So there's 2 scenarios for desal based on our water supply condition and the level of rainfall that we may receive. The first phase would be 3,125 acre feet per year. And so this is the case where we get another dry winter this year, and in April of 2015 is when we'll be asking council to consider award of a contract for a desal plant sized for 3,125 acre feet per year. That would be online by summer of 2016. The phase 2 expansion to 7,500 acre feet per year would be if, again, we get another subsequent dry winter, then the following April of 2016 is when we would be looking for council to consider authorizing the work to increase the plant capacity for supply to be online in spring of 2017. At this time, our rate study is only looking at the cost of phase 1 for the 3125 acre feet per year plant. And so this time next year, if we get another dry winter next year and reassessing our costs and our supply outlook, is when we would potentially do another rate study if it's necessary to go to the phase 2. So at this time, we're starting with phase 1. After assessing next winter, we will then reassess our costs and do another rate study if the expansion is required.
I'm just curious because I don't remember if this is part of a plan, but the 7,500, is that something new? Is that part of an existing plan? Where did that come from?
The current preliminary design study, which will be presented in more detail next month, looked at several sizing scenarios. And so these are two, the 3125 and then 7,500. And I believe 10,000 acre feet per year was also looked at. So the plant hydraulic capacity is 10,000 acre feet. And in the 89-90 drought, the treatment capacity was constructed up to 7,500 acre feet.
So the existing pumps that are there, is that what you're talking about, hydraulic capacity?
The piping, the intake, and major piping.
The 7,500 is kind of preliminary from the consultant? Is that?
Well, it's just one of the scenarios that was looked at to examine the facility engineering requirements and the costs. At this time, we're assuming it's really the city of Santa Barbara's facility, and so if there was a larger size plant and it became an option to provide water as a regional supply, that's likely what the larger size plants would be.
Thank you.
Proposed schedule, August of 2014, we've initiated the rate study and we're seeking preliminary input to set up the model. September, we will be coming back for more input from Water Commission and also going to City Council. And in November is when we would present proposed water rates and request authorization for noticing per the requirements of Prop 218. And January through March timeframe is when we would tentatively be looking for adoption of the rates. And the idea is to have them adopted and in effect prior to the contract award for desal, which is anticipated to be in April of 2015. These are some of the policy questions that we have, and I'll just walk through all of them, and you're welcome to provide feedback today. We're really going to be focusing on the first two in the presentation today, but if you have input on the others, feel free to comment on them. So what should the loan payback period be? How long should we assume the plant runs at full production capacity? How to manage reserves? How much burden should be covered in monthly fixed charges? And one thing, so monthly fixed charges affect everybody. The volumetric charges are based on how much water you use. How much burden should be covered by the top tier in the volumetric rates versus all tiers? And how to best advise customers of the rate impacts of desalination. So these are preliminary numbers based on information from the preliminary design report that's underway, And these costs are being refined, but I'm using them for purposes of the questions we're asking today. And so for a plant capacity of 3125 acre feet per year, the preliminary capital costs are $32.4 million. When the plant is in full production, it's $5.2 million per year operating cost. When it ramps down to a lower production standby mode, it's $2.5 million in operating costs. These are preliminary; they're being refined, but they're accurate enough for purposes of what we're doing today. So this,
Ms. Dyer, I'm sorry. Can you tell us a little bit about the standby? What does that mean?
My understanding is that the plant production can be scaled back substantially. For example, in normal to wet years when we don't need the supply. And so in this scenario, it's scaled back to a production of 500 acre feet per year. Okay.
Madam Chairman, to follow up on that, would that have an impact on the type of permitting that we would need?
No.
Because we're continuing to operate, it's just the volume, so it's the same permit?
Right.
Okay.
So capital debt service, this looks at a 10-year payback period versus a 20-year payback period. And this is really the heart of, this is what we're, I'm trying to get your input on which one we should use for assumptions in plugging in numbers into the rate model. And so for a 10-year payback period, the current market conditions would be 2.12% interest rate. The annual payments would be $3.8 million. The total payment over the 10-year period would be $36.2 million, and of that, interest would be $8.3 million. For a 20-year payback period, the current market interest rate is 3.36%. Annual payments would be $2.3 million. Total payment over the 20-year period is $45.1 million, and of that, interest would be $17.4 million. And
So you're asking for input from the Water Commission at this time regarding that, or is that the nature of your question?
yes, I'm looking for guidance on the 10-year versus a 20-year payback period so that we can put that assumption in terms of our annual cost. Our rate model does a 10-year financial plan, and so we have to show our annual cost for a 10-year period and then and determine our revenue requirements in order to determine a rate structure. And so this really feeds into what we're assuming for our annual costs over that 10-year period. And I've put together a couple of charts to show this is what our projected expenses are over the 10-year period without the cost of desal. And so you can see there's a slight increase that increases from about 1 to 3% per year over this period, primarily due to the operating costs. And if we add in the cost of desal, I wanted to look at how does our projected annual cost change with the different payback periods. And so this was the 10-year payback period, and the lighter orange color is the debt service, and the darker orange is our operating expenses. The percentages are not the increases from year to year. What that reflects is the difference in our total cost in that year with desal versus the total cost in that year without desal. And so you can see by FY17, which is the year when we would be in full production for the plant, our costs in that year are 20% higher than they otherwise would be. And then going forward, starting in FY18 and beyond, when the plant will be in standby mode, it's 13 to 14% higher than it otherwise would be in that year. And so I think a key point from this is that the operating costs, when we're in full production, could have significant cost impacts, more so than the capital cost. And then this chart shows what it would look like with the 20-year payback. FY17 is 17% higher. So and then beyond that, it's 10 to 11% difference. So the difference between a 10-year payback period and a 20-year payback period is about 3% in terms of what our annual costs would be going forward.
And are you assuming full production for only
1 year?
So okay. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, following up on that, obviously what our production turns out to be would very much impact this, and I'm sure we'll revisit these potential rates in the future. But just as a general philosophy, I think we've seen that paying things off sooner rather than later in terms of infrastructure is generally a good idea if it's not too onerous on the ratepayers. And we're out somewhat ahead of the curve compared to LA Department of Water Power spilling 30 acre feet the other week there on Sunset Boulevard. So it's worth getting things done right earlier, if at all possible, would be my feeling in general.
I had a question too. Just out of curiosity, how many customers or does the city have?
I think it's about 20,000.
We have approximately 24,000 single-family residences, and total meters about 27,000.
Okay.
And a population of about 90,000.
All right.
And, well, so in summary, the difference between a 10-year versus 20-year payback was 3% in total annual costs. The 20-year payback would cost an additional $9.1 million in interest, and the operating costs have more significant cost impacts on an annual basis, particularly when you're in full production. So and one thing I should mention that wasn't in this presentation, but we did look at a 5-year payback period. So I'm trying to remember how much interest that ended up being. That was $2 million in interest, but our annual costs increased by 20 to 25%. And so here's a chart showing what that looks like. And so that would be more substantial cost impacts than the 10-year or the 20-year.
Questions?
So we would assume that the top orange bar, if the drought extended and we keep needing to use the facility for a large production, would be something like that top orange bar added to those other years also.
Right, and this is for a 31-acre or 31.25-acre foot per year plant. So if there was a need to expand,
or even to continue to operate it
right
at full volume, which would entail changing the rates again.
We'll have to reassess our rates. I think whether the drought, and we're just going to have to reassess where we are next year and take 1 year at a time. Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
Nobody else has any. I'd be interested in what Mr. Samario thinks about the financing ideas. I mean, they're kind of asking us for input without sort of the professional financial analysis, and so it's kind of difficult for me anyway to give you any input on that question. I know it's kind of standard procedure, but I don't know if standard procedure is applicable here to take the longer-term approach so that you equalize rates over a longer period of time. That's been my experience in water utility financing, but I don't know if there's another approach that we should consider here. On July 29th, the City Council received a similar type report, and part of that was a little different than this, is just how Water Resources is falling behind this water year in revenue versus cost for a whole variety of reasons. And one of the concerns I've heard from City Council members is that we don't focus entirely just on desal, as we're incurring new and probably ongoing and permanent capital costs as we go through this experience, and we need to make sure that we're funding those new and anticipated capital costs as we're going and not fall too far behind. And again, we kind of got caught without a lot of preparation and asking some pretty important, significant questions. I know one of the thoughts that I'd shared with others is that on the single-family residential rate, maybe we should make the second tier 8 instead of 12. I've heard that discussed. I think in an earlier part of today's meeting, you suggested that the average water use by our single-family residential is 12. So 4 and 8 would be 12, and so most people apparently wouldn't see a tier 3 rate. I think on the big picture questions, that's about all I could offer today. Hopefully this isn't going to move as quickly as our last round of water rates. I know that everybody was pressured to get that out, and I think that's the same thing's going to happen here. And it ends up being our consultant's recommendation, and we don't have much time to really consider alternatives, and maybe that's okay. But I think similar to today, it's kind of difficult to have an informed input. Hate to do this, but the nature of beating a dead horse, because I know there's not much support for my position on this, but every time you give me an opportunity, I'm going to bring up that I think that the water rates we have for our grass irrigation is a luxury that I don't think Water Resources can continue to afford. And looking at our current water rates, we charge our residential customers for their Tier 2 irrigation water $6.39. We charge our residential commercial irrigation customers $6.39. We're selling that exact same water to our recreation parks and schools customers for $2.79. And someday we have to fix that. I don't know when that's going to be. I know it's not a popular topic. And we've always set our recycled water rate in relationship to that recreation irrigation rate. And so I know I'm repeating myself, but I think that our recycled water customers should be asked to carry a little bit more of the cost of service. It'll never be anywhere near what the actual cost of service is, but I think both of those rates should go up, and that's not something that the commission or the council is going to hear from staff. So if any of you ever think that's a good idea, then join with me to talk about it next time we talk about rates. Thank you.
I had a question. Last time we met, we talked about the intake pipe and how that affected the rates. Is that included in this initial study that they were looking at, or do we have a decision or an idea of how that's going to play into the costs?
At this time, next month is when there will be a discussion on what's factored into the costs based on the preliminary design report. And given our time frame and our schedule, it's assumed that what we're currently permitted for is what we would move forward with.
Okay.
And then, in response to Russell, or Chair Ruiz, excuse me, regarding the 10-year or 20-year payback, what I took from the information is that it doesn't really make much difference in your annual costs, whether you do 10-year or 20-year. So the question is how much interest you pay. And so given the difference in interest, I think a 10-year payback would be an appropriate assumption, although I welcome thoughts from Bob Samario, our finance director.
Thank you, Commissioners. Bob Samario, Finance Director. I think Ms. Dyer is correct that it comes down to the interest cost. If we could pay it off in 10 years versus 20, save $8 million plus, I think that would be good. I understand the idea of financing over sort of a longer period of time. That's traditional. You typically sometimes will match that with the debt with the amount of the useful life of the facility. But in this case, if we can have it paid off sooner, particularly since the facility may not be used full scale over a 20-year period, it may be over a shorter period of time, I think there's an opportunity, since the impact to ratepayers may be fairly small, to pay it off sooner and save a lot of money to do so by doing so. So that was the thought process.
Thank you, and I expect the city council is going to defer to Mr. Samarios, but to the extent it makes any difference, I respect his opinion, and so that sounds like a good idea to me.
Other input?
Oh, I was just going to say I tend to agree with that. I mean, looking at the overall cost and the percentage increase in rates, that's kind of the reason I asked how many users there were in the city, because if you spread the cost over percentage-wise, 10 to 20 years is not a huge increase in the cost per, customer's bill. So I tend to agree with the 10-year payback program.
And I thank you for your analysis. I'm going to lean with Mr. Samario and the commission as well. Though I'm maybe a little bit more of an alarmist, I feel like we are actually in the new normal, and pushing something debt out for 20 years inhibits us in our options as we move forward, because we're always going to have budgetary constraints, and there's a chance that we will turn this on and it will only go for a year or a week or a month. And I think we do need to look forward as we plan for the future and take into account what future generations are going to be dealing with. And I don't think that our droughts are going to be as rare as they've been in the past. So it sounds like we've got a consensus on the 10-year scenario for you, Ms. Dyer. You are also looking for the operating scenario.
So our current assumption is that it would operate for 1 year at full production, and we wanted to get your agreement if you think that's an appropriate assumption for now, given that we're going to also be reassessing costs next year depending on supply conditions.
And how would that assumption impact this rate study?
The cost of desal would be higher because the operating costs are $5 million per year at full production, and so they're about $2.5 million when it's not in full production. So it'd be an additional $2.5 million to plan for.
I guess what I'm asking, it seems like no matter what, we're going to have to reassess next year. So really, we're only looking at a 1-year rate study, no matter what happens. Is that
right?
Is that a correct assumption? Mm-hmm. So, sure, you can do 1 year, because we're going to have to come back and look at it anyway.
Madam Chairman, one way of looking at our history over the last 20 years is that if instead of mothballing the plant when the March Miracle happened, we had continued with some low level of production, we wouldn't be in a permitting problem right now. So I think that there's a lot to be said for if we do manage to get it up and operating and get it past the permitting hurdles, to continue to operate it at some low level, even if it's expensive, just so that we don't have to go through the permitting hoops once again.
One thing to consider is that our groundwater basin, particularly Foothill Basin, will be pretty much exhausted by the end of the drought. And so having the desal plant operating at some low level would help to restore our groundwater basins.
I just want to say, looking at the production that we get from standby mode versus running it fully operational, you're only talking a $2.5 million difference there. I mean, how much would it cost to import that much water? What's that, like 2,600 acre feet a year? I mean, I don't know if it really even makes sense to go into standby mode when you're looking at it financially from that, standpoint.
In normal to wet years, we don't use state water beyond what we're obligated to per our exchange agreement with ID1. And so imported water really is our drought supplies. So it won't, the desal plant won't replace imported water if we were to use it at some low level in normal years.
So it would most likely just offset groundwater production?
Right.
Okay, so I guess we have to balance what kind of groundwater production we can get versus how much it's costing us to desalinate the water.
Anything else you'd like from us?
It sounds like we're all comfortable with the assumptions for the 1 year at full production and then scaling it back after 1 year for purposes of financial planning and knowing that we're going to be reassessing next year what our costs are. And then the last item is our demand reduction. So we have to put into the model what we expect to see for water sales. And our current model is based on the 20% demand reduction that we are requiring. And so the idea would be to maintain that 20% demand reduction through the current fiscal year that we're in, which is FY15, and then again through FY16, with our demands not really returning to what we consider normal for until a few years after that. That's something we saw in the 89-90 drought was there was a significant drop-off in demands, and then they sort of slowly tapered up over time. They never really returned to what they were before the drought, but they did return to some degree.
That was a point that Mrs. Lodge made at the meeting a couple months ago. The pre-1990s drought was something around over 16,000 acre feet, and probably a lot of the permanent reduction is due to the fact that so many interior plumbing retrofits were put in and drought-tolerant planting and so forth. But we've lost some elasticity. Probably we may get some permanent reduction out of measures taken right now, but it may not be quite what we saw that time.
Something that may even, as we increase costs and have higher water bills, that may also be incentivize more conservation beyond the 20%. And so we've asked our consultant, Ref-Tellis financial consultants, to look at elasticity of demand, and given this increase in cost, how much of a reduction in demand could we expect to see, knowing that there is demand hardening, and at some point you just can't reduce your demand any further.
I think that's a safe assumption to make. I did have a question. One of the questions you posed to us were the fixed versus volumetric rates and how we account for those. I know that there are some state laws that require us to only have a certain percentage in fixed rates. So I guess I'd like to hear what you all are thinking and maybe react to that.
Sure. The California Urban Water Conservation Council requires that our revenues from fixed charges cannot be more than 30% of our total revenues. The idea is that volumetric charges have a greater impact and incentivize conservation more than the fixed charges do. Our current rates, I think we have about 22% of our revenue is from fixed charges, and so we're not maxing out how much we can get from fixed fees, and part of that is we want to incentivize conservation, but also minimize costs to those who are really trying to use less water and may have income issues. So what I'm proposing that we do for the rate study is to look at two scenarios, and one would be what do our rates look like if we maximize our fixed charges, and what does it look like if we minimize our fixed charges, so that we can see the bounds of what that might look like in our rate structure. But we could never go more than 30%.
Have you given consideration if we restart the desal plant, that some of the other area people would need to purchase from a desal plant?
Can you repeat the question?
Pardon?
Could you please repeat the question?
In this evaluation, have you factored in that in addition to Santa Barbara needing some desal plant output, that some of the other communities that are in the area here would also need to purchase some desal?
At this time, the analysis assumes that Santa Barbara would bear the full cost, and the cost would, or all the supply would go to Santa Barbara. Our permits, right? I think there may be a permitting issue on whether we can supply to other agencies. If that became an option to us in the future, then that would reduce the cost that we're seeing here.
I know for electricity for low-income homes, they've got programs that can help them with their costs. Have we thought about that as our rates are going to go higher and higher if we do go to desal? Is that something we've factored in at all?
Not that I know of, but it's something we can consider. Bill, did you have?
Hi, Rebecca Bjork, Public Works Director. Specifically to whether or not we can subsidize low income, the way Prop 218 is structured currently, we cannot. It doesn't have an exclusion for that. It is, as rates go up in communities across the state, it is becoming an issue. Some water districts have expressed interest in trying to get that changed, so there would be an opportunity to recognize the needs to make affordable water or water and sewer for low income. Because our electric rates are managed by the PUC, I think they have different rules than what we have to do for Prop 218. But it's certainly something that we're aware of and concerned about, and that's one of the places that the fixed meter charge can play a role.
One other aspect that hasn't been addressed is that the desal plant produces sodium chloride water, and irrigation works better with calcium, magnesium, sulfate, and carbonate water. Presumably, we could pump to most of the lower downtown basin off of the desal plant. There's not a lot of irrigation meters other than lawns there. Probably most of those lawns could survive sodium chloride water, but there may be another little complication in distribution if we would ramp up really to a 7,500 acre feet a year water, and that some users would have problems with it.
Comment noted. We'll relay that to the desal project team and the consultant.
If we're in that bad of shape, maybe tough luck irrigators, but it's an aspect of that water.
Okay, there's no other comments, and did we answer what you needed, Ms. Dyer?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you
very much. We will close this item and move on to item number 8, Lisa Arroyo and its secondary process improvements preliminary design contract.
Madam Chair, Ms. Arroyo has a presentation for you.
Good afternoon. I'm pleased to be here today to present the Secondary Process Improvements Project. This project is the culmination of 4 years of hard work from the engineering department, the wastewater department, and our consultant. And we are pleased to be moving forward into detailed design. A little bit of background. As you probably all know, El Estero is an 8 MGD facility. We process about 8 million gallons of wastewater each and every day. The plant was originally constructed back in 1952. However, in 1978, it went through some major overhauls to meet the Clean Water Act 1972 requirements, and most of the infrastructure that was constructed at that time is here today. We're now at the stage where we really need to replace our aging infrastructure and update our treatment processes. This project will be a significant project for El Estero. It will change how we treat our wastewater, and the total cost of it is about $23 million for the total cost of the project. We started this project back in 2010 when Brown & Caldwell was hired to do an assessment report on our air process, which is basically all of the air in our secondary and our aeration basins. In 2011, Brown & Caldwell was again hired to do a preliminary design report. And as we worked our way through that first preliminary design report, we realized that we needed to treat the whole secondary process as part of this evaluation. So Brown & Caldwell was hired again in 2013 to do a second phase, and this incorporated all of our secondary treatment processes: the aeration basins, secondary clarifiers, the RAS, and basically the whole process. The project will address some...
I'm sorry. For probably about 4 years now, I've been trying to follow. I was particularly interested in recycled water facility, and staff's been working on this part of it, and I'd like to understand better how they work together. I mean, we've got our recycled water facility under construction. I know over the years there was some debate as to which you should do first and how they are interacting. So that to the extent you can help me there, I assume this is going to make our recycled water even better. But if you could, just how they interact and why we're doing it the timing that we're doing it. Because I know I tried to push recycled, and for a while I was being told that, well, maybe we should do this first, and I don't really even remember exactly how it came out that we're doing it on this timeline. But to the extent you want to add that to your presentation, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. I'll go ahead and address it right now. Bullet 2, highly variable secondary effluent. That's been a long-standing issue at El Estero. Traditionally we've been high in turbidity, high in total suspended solids, and that's affected our ability to filter out our secondary effluent for tertiary treatment. Now, the tertiary project, we went to an MF system, so it can handle our effluent the way it is now. We're going to be, once that system's up and running, we're going to be producing acceptable quality. It will meet Title 22 requirements. What this project will do is it will help it even more. It's going to reduce the suspended solids. It's going to reduce the turbidity going to the filter, so those membranes are going to have to not work quite so hard. We're not going to have to do as much maintenance to them, cleaning, things like that. But this will produce a much higher quality secondary effluent, both for tertiary and for ocean discharge. In addition, we're going to be addressing our operation inflexibilities, our energy inefficiencies, some secondary treatment capacity issues with respect to peak wet weather flows. We have some issues with flow distribution and our RAS-WAS system. So most of the improvements can be categorized into these key improvements: the aeration system improvements, secondary clarifier improvements, RAS-WAS system improvements, and secondary effluent recycle. Just to give you a lay of the land, here is our primary and secondary processes. We've got our 5 primary clarifiers that you'll see right here on the right. We have our 6 aeration basins. Currently, our aeration basin number 6 is an equalization basin, but it will go back online with this project as an aeration basin. And then we have our 7 secondary clarifiers on the left. The aeration system improvements involve replacing the blowers. This is one of the key items in this portion of the project. Our blowers are about 40 years old, and they're oversized. They were designed for coarse bubble aeration, and we do fine bubbles. So we really have a lot more air than we need. We have problems with turn down, so it's kind of like full blast or not enough. We just can't get it dialed in so we can efficiently aerate our wastewater. And so with new blowers, what we're going to be able to do is provide that operational flexibility. We'll be able to match our air demands with our air supply much more closely. We'll be much more energy efficient. And our 40-year-old blowers, which every time they break, we panic on how we're going to get new spare parts. We're going to be able to fix them and feel good about having them in our system. This is one of the aeration basins filled with water, and then here it is empty. We're basically going to be reconfiguring these basins. If you think about it, we're going to be removing all of our baffles. You see the baffle walls right here, the almost rust-colored baffles. All of our diffusers, which are those discs on the bottom that aerate. All of the pipings, these gates, all along here, all of it is going to be removed. And we're going to be installing cutthroat flumes at both the front and the midpoint, and that's going to allow us to have much more equalized flow coming into our aeration basins. We're going to be motorized so that we don't have our operators coming up and lifting the slide gates. It'll all be automated. We'll have new baffle walls, new mixers, new diffusers. And this is what the process will look like. Your primary clarifier effluent, or what we call PCE, will be coming into the 2 points, one at the front, one at the mid, and it'll be going through the process. We've got 2 anaerobic zones, and then it'll go into an aerobic zone where we'll be adding air. Then we'll go back to 2 anoxic zones. We'll be mixing, and then we'll be going back to aerated zones again before it goes into the clarifiers. Now, to treat flows past 19 MGD, when we're getting up into our wet weather flows, we have to operate under a different scheme because this process won't work. So what we'll do here is we'll send all of our primary clarifier effluent to the midway point, and that's going to be reducing the load, the solids loads on the clarifiers. So it'll just go in a loop, and that's the way we will manage our peak wet weather flows. We anticipate that we can match the IPS, our influent pump station, pumping capacity at about 32 MGD when we operate under reaeration mode. The secondary clarifier improvements, and here's a secondary clarifier, those really are targeted at flow splitting. And again, if you look at the scheme, you'll see how everything is offset. And what that's causing is some short circuiting, especially down in our secondary clarifiers. Our wastewater will decide that it likes one of the or 2 of the clarifiers on the ends more than the other ones, so we're having unequal sludge withdrawal. We're going to be installing what's called a cut-throat flume right here, and that's going to bring all of our effluent from the aeration basins to one centralized location. Here's a blow-up of it, and then it will get evenly distributed to the clarifiers. We'll also be wasting instead of wasting RAS, activated sludge, will be wasting mixed liquor. It's a slight change in what we do now, but we will be able to better control our foam as it comes off of our aeration basins, and we will have a better operational procedure or process by doing that. The RAS-WAS system improvements, we're going to be doing larger suction pipes, better flow measurement control. You can see the old Venturis in these pipes. Those will be gone and will be more automated. Here are our pumps for our RAS-WAS system. We will be upgrading all of those to new pumps that will better meet our demands and our variation in flows. We'll also be replacing our pipes. We have 40-year-old pipes coming out of the system that need to be that brings the waste mixed liquor down to the DAFT. We'll need to be putting new ones in and upgrading those as well. The last thing is secondary effluent recycle. This is new. We will be taking secondary effluent and taking a small portion of it off to directly down to the IPS, which is right here, and recycling it. The purpose of that is to really get a constant flow through the plant. We feel like if we can have constant flow and limit the variation, it will be very helpful operationally. Plus, you'll be bringing some of the effluent that's nitrate, the nitrates from the nitrified effluent, down to the IPS, which will help start the treatment process, and we're expecting a reduced chemical costs from that. I talked a little bit about this, and I'll go into a little greater detail on how we're going to be changing the way we process our wastewater. Currently, we have wastewater coming into the influent pump station. It goes into the grit chamber where we slow it down a little bit. Our inorganics settle out and go to disposal. The water continues on to the primary clarifiers where, again, we slow it down. We start getting some of the organics out of the wastewater that go to the gravity thickener. And then we'll be sending the water to the aeration basin. When we get to these first two anaerobic zones, it's going to be mixing, and what we'll be doing there is we will be denitrifying our RAS, because in addition to the primary clarifier effluent that's coming in, we'll also have that return RAS stream coming in. That's going to have some nitrates in it. So this first section is going to be for denitrification of that. Then we'll go over to the first aerated zone, and that will promote nitrification. Then we'll go into this second anoxic zone, and that will denitrify the previously nitrified effluent in the aeration zone. And then finally, we'll do one more aeration zone, which will oxidize your BOD. Then it'll go into the cutthroat flumes, where we'll have that nice equal flow split. And we'll also be wasting our mixed liquor at that point. And it will go into our secondary clarifiers. Coming out of the secondary clarifiers, we've got the RAS loop, and we also have the recycle to the IPS, and also the primary, or the final effluent that goes down for ocean discharge and tertiary. So here's where we've been. We've done the assessment, we've done the PDR, we've done a second phase of the PDR, and we are ready to start preliminary design, detailed design. This preliminary design will bring our project up to about the 60% design phase. We'll then be rolling forward to final design, bidding the project, and anticipate that we will have construction complete in 2017, maybe 2018. It's about a 2-year construction period. We are in the process of obtaining an SRF loan for this project. We've applied for $20 million. We have received notification from the state that they are working to get the finance agreement to us. We expect that within the next 2 or so months that we will have an executed finance agreement, and we'll be able to fully fund the final design. However, we want to move forward with preliminary design now. We've got the money, city funds, to pay for this 60% design stage, and we will be going back for a second contract for final design once that SRF loan comes through. So with that, I'd like to answer any questions that you might have.
I had to sort of follow up to my previous comment. Is this everything? I mean, like I said, I've been here for 7 years. About 4 or 5 years we've been working on between recycled and this. I know that there were some budget issues as to whether water resources or wastewater pays for what. So I'm just, what's the big picture? Is the recycled facility and this, is that it? Or is there other pieces to it?
Define everything. Are you talking about everything that's going on at El Estero, or are we talking just the secondary treatment?
I guess, I'm not an engineer. So I looked at this as our wastewater facility, which I understand today why recycled is different, but I always kind of saw it as one big thing. And we've been talking about this. Like I said, I've been here for 7 years. We've probably been talking about it for 5 at least. And so I understand the recycled facility. I sort of understand what you've just presented here. Is there more to it that we're going to be doing within a foreseeable period of time?
Yes, I believe you all know that we have the biosolids assessment. Those are going to be some major improvements. We kicked that off 6 months ago, and that will be some major changes. I think we're estimating that to be about a $15 million worth of improvements by the time we're done, depending on if we're where the consultant lands on, if we need more digesters, what issues we need to resolve. So that is going to be another sizable project that you will be seeing in the near future. We've got some improvements to the chlorination facility that we will be needing to do in the next couple of years, not to this magnitude. It's an operating wastewater treatment plant that's 40 years old, so we are systematically going through and taking a look at each process area and updating them accordingly and trying to address the ones that need it the most first. So I think you've got most of the big ticket items, but we will constantly be coming back and making improvements to areas that we haven't yet touched.
Thank you.
One of the commenters speaking about the desal plant noted that there's seismic risk to the desal plant, and I would say that the seismic risk to the desal plant is almost negligible compared to the seismic risk to El Estero, and the basic shell of El Estero is probably mainly the same as what was put in 1952. And there's not much opportunity to change that at this point in time. But with the installation of these particular functional units, there may be opportunities to install them in a way that's they're more seismically stable within it. Is any consideration being given to that in these designs?
Absolutely. We do have a task for Brown and Caldwell to perform seismic evaluation, take a look at any deficiencies that we may have, and design the appropriate fix for those.
On the type of installations we're talking about right now, you mean these individual sort of components that go in it? I wouldn't imagine there's much opportunity to retrofit the whole installation. I mean, the thing's on like 80-foot piers or something down into the sand.
Correct. They would be looking at the aeration basins, and is there any type of structural deficiency or any type of seismic improvements that need to be made for that structure. We wouldn't be looking necessarily at the subgrade, the piles.
That's a good point. The walls of the aeration basins or something could be susceptible to sudden crumbling. We hope not.
Please don't say that.
And I just wanted to add, Commissioner Ruiz, in the past years, we have, down at El Estero, they've had a very aggressive asset management program where they've evaluated all their systems and processes and put together a great program for preventative maintenance, because we all realize how expensive it is to maintain a wastewater treatment plant. So with this preventative maintenance asset management program, we're hoping to extend the useful life of these processes and get to maintenance before it becomes catastrophic.
I believe that Ms. Arroyo is looking for a recommendation.
I was looking at the estimated total project cost table, which goes on for a page and a half. I see that what we're being asked for right now is on page 3, preliminary design by contract. Does that mean the preliminary design report phase 1 and phase 2 before that and all has already been paid for?
That is correct. We've done the assessment, the preliminary design phase 1, phase 2. We are our preliminary design reports. We are now going into detailed design, so we'll be doing a full-blown preliminary design up to the 60% level with this contract. So if you want to, I'm not sure if you could do this, if you want to not see me when I come for final design, you could approve them both, because I do expect us to come relatively soon for final design. It's only going to take us about 3 months to do the preliminary design work, and in that time period, we will have gotten our SRF loan. So we will be going back to council again to ask for the remaining, I don't have the report in front of me, $900,000 or so for Brown and Caldwell's contract.
There's $1,021,000 final design is the next item down from 610.
Yeah.
And of course, we're delighted to see you come back and talk to us. You're very informative in your presentation. But what I was driving at is, in other words, we get on page 3 to $783,000. That is funded, cashed out, and what we're doing is coming down below the thick black line and funding additional things below that line.
Correct. Today's is really just that 635 or so. I apologize. I gave my report to somebody else.
610, according to
610 for Brown and Caldwell.
Right. And that shows up on that table. So it wasn't clear to me just looking at it what part had already been funded versus what we're being asked to fund now, and what we're looking at, which sounds like everything else below it on the table in the future. But with that being clarified, I would move that we recommend this to the council.
Second.
Got a move and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Arroyo. And we are going to go back to Ms. Taylor.
Yes, Madam Chair and Commissioners, in front of you I also have a council agenda report. It's for approval of the Quinn Corporation for the maintenance, repair, upgrades, and new installation of the Caterpillar generator systems. We did this 5 years ago, and it's for a 5-year period, and we're back again. Our recommendation is to find it in the city's, for that council, find it in the city's best interest to approve Quinn Corporation Incorporated as the vendor for maintenance, repair, upgrades, and new installation of Caterpillar generators at the city's water resources facilities without bids, as authorized by Municipal Code Section 4.52.08K, and authorize the Public Works Director to award purchase order contracts to Quinn Incorporated for such services and equipment as needed for the next 5 years. In water resources, we have backup generators at our treatment plants. That's the wastewater treatment plant and at the Cater Water treatment plant, and we have them out in the field at our water pump stations and our wastewater lift stations. And we've found it most effective to to basically standardize on one type of equipment. That way our staff has to be trained on one piece of mechanical equipment. We need the tools and backup parts for only one piece of equipment. And over the years, the Caterpillar generators have really proven themselves for their reliability and durability. And surely remember a few of the fires where we definitely needed a generator to start now. Quinn is, since 1993, has been the only authorized dealer to who's certified to supply and maintain the Caterpillar generators in this area, and so this is why we're making this request right now.
So that means that this is not the kind of thing that somebody else is going to come and challenge us for not offering it to them?
Correct, but however, if in the future that it changes and there is another locally authorized dealer for Caterpillar generators, that we would entertain, their bid.
Is this a fixed cost contract, or is it based on services?
It's based on services, and it's based on the year-to-year contract of what each, this doesn't just cover water distribution, also covers water treatment, it covers wastewater treatment as well, and whatever contracts either any of those three divisions would need over the next 5 years, and it would be within approved council budgets.
And if there are no other questions, I believe Ms. Taylor is looking for a recommendation.
Yes.
I'd say as long as you're happy with them and their service, I move to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Water Resources Manager's Report.
Unfortunately, I don't have this in presentation form, so I will walk you through the document. And on the front page, we'll start with the planned and actual water production by source. And the highlights I would like to point out, over on the far right column down, if we look at June and July, under water system total, our actual water use is down from what was planned. And I'd also like to highlight over, if you go in 6 columns, moving towards the left, under recycled water, the recycled water, what we've actually used is much less than what was planned. It was in July. We planned for 98 units, and it's now they used 72, and in July, I'm sorry, that was June and July, it was 119, and actual was 92. And I want to thank our Parks and Rec and golf course folks for cutting back on their recycled water use there. And flipping to the next sheet, which is our City of Santa Barbara.
Sure.
I'm sorry?
When the groundwater production is 0 in storage unit 1, the information was presented earlier. Sounds like we might get production starting in September or October back online.
Yes, Commissioner Keller, we sure hope so. With our wells down, we're struggling, yes.
Okay.
Good point.
Madam Chair, can I ask a question? I just noticed, when I was advocating to get our recycled facility going, I used to look every month at blend water, recycled water. Quite frankly, that's how I first figured out that our recycled facility wasn't working 7 years ago, when I asked what blend water meant. So for years, I looked at this chart and following blend water and recycled water, and then I haven't been looking at it recently, and then this month, for these other water use reasons, I was looking at it, and the chart's been reconfigured. And so blend water and recycled water used to be right next to each other, and Alistero process usage, which I understand what that is, but that didn't used to be on there. And trying to understand, without first asking you, what blend water meant, it isn't always recycled water plus Alistero. So what does blend water mean today?
I will defer to Ms. Dyer.
The way that the table is structured generally is that on the left-hand side, that's all of our sources of water. And on the right-hand side, that describes where the water goes. And so our total retail demand for the recycled system is under recycled water, a portion of which is met by blend water. So some of our recycled water demands, shown in the third column from the right, are met by blend water, and then that blend water is made up of the mixture of the sources to the left. Does that make sense?
For a couple of years, though, blend water and recycled water were almost the same number. And it's not the case now. And I'm just wondering if you've defined blend water a little differently, or if it's just because of the transition to shutting down the recycle facility. I hadn't noticed this up until this month, that you'd reconfigured this chart, and I was just trying to understand what blend water means today.
They're fairly close. So in July, we're showing, this reminds me, the blend water is actually used to supply Elistero process usage. So the total recycled demand would be recycled water and Elistero process usage. So if you add those together and subtract the blend water column, that's how you arrive at how much recycled water production.
It's not worth talking about anymore, but it's not exactly. I mean, I went through here, but that's okay. It's close enough. I mean, it's close, but it's just not exact. And I was just wondering if there was something else in there. But
I know we've had some production from our recycled water plant up until, I think, July is when I would have expected that to drop off. And so starting in July is when I would have expected 100% blend water.
That's good enough for now.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll go to the next page, which is the City of Santa Barbara's water demand. And the dark line, thick line, is our moving 12-month production. And the lighter line with the X's on it is our long-term water supply projections. And as you can see, the good news is we are trending down. So that's the good news of that graph. And any questions on that?
I got a question. What month is that peak? Or is that right towards the end of the line?
I think that was May when we had a lot of high use.
Okay.
I would say right before we declared drought, probably, because we saw that trend going up and wanted to reverse it.
The next sheet is the City of Santa Barbara water use per gallons per capita per day, or GPCD. And the red line is our GPCD targets to meet our goal in 2020 of 117 gallons of water used per capita per day. And the blue line is the moving average of our GPCD and of the moving for the past 12 months. And right now we're at 127 gallons per is our GPCD for the average. And then the monthly GPCD average, the monthly value is the lighter dotted line. And you can see how that trends up and down. But I guess the good news story here is the 12-month average is trending down towards our target of 117. The next sheet is our Gibraltar rainfall data. And I think of note here, if you look at the last three totals for the last 3 years, they are the three most driest consecutive years, with the last rain year of 2012 to 2013 being the driest year on record in this sheet here, which dates back to 1959.
And I think that's true of the full recorded history, which goes back to the early 1900s, 1929.
Then the next sheet is the 3-month outlook for temperature probability from NOAA. And we continue to be above normal. And this sheet is dated July 17th, so that's for the next 3 months. So we can expect higher than average temperatures. And that's followed by the 3-month outlook for precipitation probability from NOAA. also dated July 17th. So it's for the probability for precipitation for the next July, August, September. So it looks like perhaps a little above normal.
I would note that it's outside of our typical rainy season, so above normal in our dry period I wouldn't expect a lot of rainfall.
And then this is followed by the Gibraltar Reservoir hydrograph. I apologize if your copy is not too clear, but currently we have less than 2,000 acre-feet of storage in the reservoir right now. We're holding off on this water depending on how the Comb project works out. So we don't want to use it now in case that the Comb project is delayed at all. We will have water we can take from Gibraltar. The following graph is the Kachuma storage. It compares the current drought to the 1986 to 93 period. If you, on the green line is the drought from 1986 to 93, and the dark black line is where we are, and we're currently trending as very similar to where we were in the third year of the previous drought, or I think that is 1989. Then the following sheet is, we move into wastewater, El Estero influent flow comparison. It's pretty straightforward to the bar chart where the black bar is the current year, and it's substantially lower than the last 2 years. I think that correlates with the rainfall.
I would actually, the axis is a little misleading.
Because it doesn't start at...
Because it doesn't start at 0.
Right.
I think we talked about that last meeting. It would be fantastic if we could have that start at 0. I think it just keep everybody on the same page.
Thank you. Good point.
Also, excuse me, Madam, it shouldn't correlate all that well with rainfall if the pipes aren't leaking water in.
Well, but with the thought being that in a drought, people are using less water inside as well.
Hopefully. That's what it's telling us. Not that we're missing.
We're trying to get the message out. The next is the City of Santa Barbara's graph of annual SSOs, or sanitary sewer overflows. Our goal this year with our consent decree was 12 for the calendar year, and unfortunately we are at 13. It suggests that with the drought as well, we're having a lot of root problems with roots going into the sewer lines, and I believe there's some discussion if we need to have a more aggressive cleaning cycle from what we currently have of our major pipes.
So what does that mean since we're over the goal?
I'll have to get back to you. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to talk to our wastewater system manager. I wish I had a better answer for you. I will get back to you on that, though.
Okay, thank you.
And then the bottom graph is the net recycled production to the distribution system in 2014 for an acre feet. This is the recycled water and blend water content. And if you notice, in July we have no recycled water because the plant is down. And I think that is it for this packet.
Any other questions before we dismiss? No? Well, got two here. Go ahead.
I was just wondering about the fact that we were here, which fooled me. This indicates we're going back to our regular conference room.
Yes, please note at the bottom that the next scheduled meeting is Monday, September 8th, and we will be back at our regular meeting area in the 619 Garden Street on the third floor in the Water Resources Conference Room.
Were we just expecting more public this time? Is that why we're here?
The reason we met here is so that we could videotape the conservation piece. So we actually videotape that, and then we'll be making it available online for people.
I apologize that you weren't aware of the change in location, Commissioner Keller.
I read the fine print before I got in the room.
I should have done that too. I went over to the other place and I was twiddling my thumbs there by myself.
One thing that I know I've asked for before, and it was I agreed to we could put it off, so we didn't do it today. But I'd like to understand the CCWA order process and what we're actually planning to do, and just get a kind of overview of how that all works and the timing and what we're actually going to do this coming year. And the other thing that I thought was rather dramatic at the city council, and you touched on it here, is that there's only 21,500 acre feet of project water left in Kachuma. And not that this is really important, but I think it would be interesting to see how that's calculated, and maybe even if you could take it out to next month and show, how you've calculated that, where the downstream release, who else's water's in there, and it's a pretty dramatic situation. I was wondering if even in the last major drought, project water got that low. I mean, 21,000, that's scary. But anyway, I think it would be interesting for us to just, if you could show what's left and whose it is.
Sure.
Thanks.
I'd be happy to do that. The county has been leading that effort and has a really nice bar chart for breaking up the pools or the accounts within Kachuma. And you're right, I think back then there wasn't as much downstream water rights stored in the lake as there is right now. So that's a big change. We also didn't have state water back then, so there's a lot of differences between now and then.
Okay. Thank you to everyone for being here, and enjoy the rest of your evening.